Mexico appears under siege at the moment, and I want to take some time to um, visit with everybody on what seems to be going on. A lot of disinformation moving around right now. I just had to delete something that came from a firsthand source, actually, for the Guadalajara airport. So let me say this. I'm not on the ground in Puerto Vallarta right now. Many of you guys know that I have a home there. I spend a very big part of my life and writing time down there. I'm trying to adjust this camera just a second. So I want to make sure that what I'm hearing on the ground is reported to you if you guys are interested and talk about the overall situation, although things are problematic, clearly. So the bottom, let me explain kind of the 30,000-foot level situation of what appears to be going on. I'd be more than happy to have people kind of posting anything from credible news sources here in the chat so that everybody gets the best information possible. But we do need to be careful with sort of misinformation that's going on. I'm getting stuff from firsthand accounts of people on the ground there that reporters are saying this is or this is not true. And so again, the part of this whole drill is going to be a disinformation campaign from a very sophisticated operation on behalf of the cartels. And let's talk about what that is and what that means a little bit. As AP reported, probably the single largest cartel leader, most wanted in Mexico, nicknamed El Mencho, kind of filled. I guess I was going to say he filled the void after El Chapo left the scene, but that's really not a good characterization. But a vacuum is obviously left and will be left in the coming days, as the cartels and the leaders seek position not only internally but territory starts to happen, and as U.S. involvement becomes a defining feature of what's going on in Mexico in this fight against cartel power. So, and we'll talk about that in just a second. But again, for the moment, it appears that the death of El Mencho has created a visceral pushback and reaction from the Nuevo Generacion cartel located headquartered in Jalisco. Jalisco is one of the central states. Guadalajara is the capital of Jalisco. To the west of it is where Puerto Vallarta is, the Bay of Banderas. The Bay of Banderas. It sits on the Pacific coast, just below the tip of Cabo San Lucas, the tip of Baja California. So, with that in mind, obviously there's been an escalated intention by the United States to demand that a crackdown on cartel activity in Mexico start happening. Now, the size of the cartels, you have to understand that the cartels essentially are, I don't, if they're not are if are the government, I was going to say, but if they're not completely the government, they're so deeply intertwined at this point that when you start to extract this type of an activity or behavior, the inevitable backlash and pushback is going to be violent, because you can't really extricate the two cleanly anymore. This gap, this void that has been developing over the course of decades now with cartels, has essentially consumed most of the Mexican political system and governance system. And the United States is by overwhelmingly the largest market for these drugs, the drugs that they bring in. And it's a real neat, easy, clean, simple political answer to say, well, it's just Mexico running drugs in here. And if we just stop that, the violence will stop. This is clearly far more involved than that. And that is such a basic, elementary understanding of a very complex problem. It's impossible not to think that at some level there has been American influence in what has been happening with the flows of drugs across our border. And I know that's probably a very controversial statement, but it's also it's nonsensical to think otherwise. It just is. Let me give you a very specific example. Many of you who've been following me read that piece that I wrote on Charlie Kirk and MAGA. Very simple, basic understanding of what happens when a vacuum is created by the death of a leader who oversees a very large operation. I just posted this last week. This is kind of what happened with Charlie Kirk. And I made comparisons to what happens with organized crime and cartels when the same thing happens. When the leadership is decapitated, killed, removed, a vacuum is created and all sorts of things starts to fill that void. Not just scurrying from the bottom of underbosses trying to get more power, more leverage, more money, although that's clearly the case, but it also creates a whole systemic challenge from the top down that has essentially built and enabled that. The same way as you're watching Turning Point USA um, um, deal with its own problems. And I'm not making a comparison, certainly not a direct comparison between Turning Point, excuse me, I said Talking Point USA, Turning Point USA and the drug cartels. But what I'm absolutely making a comparison to is the power politics in a vacuum. Doesn't matter what the construct is. This is how it works. This is how it elevates. So this morning, I was awakened by people that both I know, neighbors, expats, Americans, Mexican employees, vendors, contractors, people that I work with down there. Again, I have a life down there as well in Puerto Vallarta, where the most photos you're seeing that were coming out earliest are in the area called the Zona Romantica. It's called the Romantic Zone. This is Old Town Puerto Vallarta. And Old Town Puerto Vallarta is a very unique, magical place because it still has a very strong Pueblo feel to it. It's a very old world Mexican feel to it, the way a Cabo San Lucas, for example, does, or Cancun doesn't. Those are just kind of more like, high-rise resorts, and you can kind of go to Maui or Orange County, California, or Miami for that. Puerto Vallarta is very unique in that way, certainly on the Pacific coast. So a lot of the photos that I was getting are less than a mile from my house. Gas stations on fire, buses on fire, cars turned over and on fire, and it's remarkable because the immediate reaction from folks down there, the Mexicans were not panic or peril or worry. It's just kind of yeah, this is unfortunately part of what we're dealing with. The Americans down there, of course, are horrified and terrified because that's not something that is it's inconceivable that we would be dealing with this type of a thing and that activity. And the expats, of course, are very concerned, but we're also witnessing concern amongst tourists. People who are down there for this is one of the best. February is one of the best times to be in that part of Mexico. The weather is stellar. Restaurants are going. Tourism is a big part of this, and there's no question that this is part of the strategy of what these cartels are engaged in doing is shutting this stuff down. So, over the course of a few hours, though, it was clear that the problem is getting worse. And these are not verified yet, but pretty good reports on the ground that one of the municipal jails was broken open into and inmates were freed. Um, Bridges up to San Sebastian, which is, I've written stories about San Sebastian, a surrounding city up in the mountainous area surrounding Puerto Vallarta, have been bombed out. Dozens and dozens of cars, buses lit on fire to create roadblocks to kind of shut down and choke the city. But what I do want to make this really clear, this is not just about Puerto Vallarta. We're seeing so much of it because there's so many Americans with photos and media presence there. And it's not bad. It's good that we're getting that reporting. But this is happening in dozens of locations throughout Jalisco, throughout the state of Jalisco, and throughout Western, which is largely west of Guadalajara, which is the capital city. Guadalajara itself is essentially under siege at the moment too. And I don't want to be too alarmist, even though I titled this Mexico Under Siege. Um, you don't want to rattle people too much, but these are clearly very violent images. Like this is serious stuff. When cars are being lit on fire, when airport shots are taking place, um, you've got to be mindful that this is I think calling it under siege is probably quite accurate. Again, as somebody who's been going back and forth to Mexico for 20 years and spent a significant amount of time there, I'm always a little bit protective um, of how the rest of the world perceives these types of activities and how Americans respond to them for obvious reasons. And so you don't want to like over rattle Americans by what's going on when you kind of report what's going on, but undeniably this is serious stuff, right? Like the Costco is on fire, the jails have been broken up. There's gunfire in smaller pueblos north and south of Puerto Vallarta. And I posted on my X feed. I'll try to post it here in just a bit. Um, so there's now good, reports on websites that are reporting where these activities are happening, and they're happening in 35 plus different places in cities, all from Guadalajara west to the Pacific coast. So it's important. Um, Aline, you're in Merida. I live in Tulum. Notice huge police presence along highways and in the town. I'm hearing gunshots reported in Tijuana, in cities all over the place, and that's a big part of this. Is trying to thank you, Aline. Keep reporting back with what you're hearing. Um, if it's first person accounts, obviously let me know. Especially if there's photos or videos, I'm getting dozens of them. I've been posting them on my social media feeds, and that's when I decided I would just jump on and start kind of conveying this stuff, because it's clearly a very serious situation, and it is spreading beyond not just the city of Puerto Vallarta, but the region of the state of Jalisco, the central state of Jalisco, to other parts of the country. Now, how bad is this going to get? Well, I mean, look, nobody knows how bad it's going to get. This is not. I think the size and scope of this is somewhat unprecedented, but it's not completely unprecedented that the cartels will kind of send a signal to the government after knocking down a, a crime boss, a head of a cartel, which this seems to be the immediate response to, is a pushback and saying, if you're going to come after us, we're going to come after you. And I want to be very delicate on how I say this, but you have to remember, the Trump administration put a multi-million dollar bounty on El Mencho's head, and we have been bombing and hitting um, drug boats, kind of similar to what we were doing in Venezuela. I don't know that, can't say whether they are or they weren't drug boats, but these are a little bit more like skiffs. They're not like major cargo ships that have been in coordination with the Mexican government. The United States government has been taking these positions out. This has been building for some time. Okay. And this is an aggressive act. We can debate how legitimate or understandable it is for a lot of geopolitical reasons, but there's no question that the escalation on behalf of the US and Mexican governments combined to crack down on the drug trafficking trade has increased markedly in the past few weeks and months. Okay, there's no question about that. And whether that's right or wrong, I think it's probably right on its face. There are going to be consequences to that. And it is the height of irony as the number one drug market, our own intelligence agencies for decades have known about this. We've been able to monitor different flows, use this as a leverage point. We have, as consumers, at the very basic sense, not only enabled this, but we've allowed this to thrive. We are demanding this. Okay. Uh, Ana Luis Rios' sister in Puerto Vallarta, there's a riot right now. I think there is. If you have, let's be careful with that. The U.S. Embassy has told people to stay inside. And the word that I'm getting is the cartels are also putting word out that anybody outside after sunset is in danger of being shot. What they're trying to do is instill fear in the community. That's the goal. That's the tactic. I don't know that the riots. I want to make sure that I'm not saying it isn't true. I'm not saying it is true. I'm saying I haven't seen any independent verification of that. I don't know why people would be rioting. That doesn't make sense. Nobody's going to go out and fight the cartels hand to hand. Okay. If there's rioting, what it's probably meant is there are cartel members that are going through and vandalizing and creating mayhem. Maybe that's a riot, maybe that's not. But it's not as though there's social unrest or an uprising or pushback from the Mexican people. That's not what's happening. bombing skiff seems unrelated to how drugs come into America. No, it's not unrelated. It's completely related because the part of the routes often go by sea, not necessarily coming into the U.S. that way, but moving up the coast. So that's exactly how it's done. Not all of it, but a lot of it is done. So I don't think it's unrelated at all. Regardless, there's a lot that we don't know about how the U.S.'s pressure and involvement has basically forced Mexico's hand on this. And I'm not going to, again, sit in judgment of this. Let me say this again for the third time. I'm not educated enough to know what I don't know. And the truth of the matter is, I probably don't want to know how deeply involved the U.S. government is with the Mexican government, with the cartels. But to think that it's just some sort of a bilateral or trilateral relationship is silly. It's absolutely silly. As I mentioned, the cartels are deeply ingrained in the Mexican government. We have known this for decades. We have been involved with it. We have been complicit with it. Most of the arms that these cartels are using are U.S. manufactured weapons and weaponry. And once we start to mess with what is essentially an established business line that we have at least tacitly enabled and engaged, there's going to be repercussions. So, like I said, I'm certainly not one of these blame America first crowds. I'm just looking at the raw politics of this and saying, if you put pressure on point A, it's going to have impacts on point B. And so that's part of the challenge. So every president promises to get this under control, but they're also part of this corruption. Yeah, but like I said, it's bigger than that. The U.S. is involved in this. To think that the U.S. is not involved in monitoring, engaging, and regulating this is a very naive understanding of what's going on. Of course we know. Of course we know. And I'll give you the main example, the main reason why. If Mexico completely fell into a narco state, and it's been closed for many, many years, you would see a rush of millions of people coming north to escape the chaos of a zombie state. If it was a completely cartel-driven state, you 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 would see mass migration that we could not hold back with a wall or a bunch of border patrol agents. People would be fleeing the violence of a failed state, a failed nation. We can't allow that to happen. And let me posit one other thing that needs to be at least considered here. And I'm not going to try to sound conspiracy theorist, but as somebody who studies politics pretty closely, when El Chapo was captured 6 years ago now, whatever it was, uh, El Chapo was really the power center of the top of the cartel pyramid. Did you ever notice that when he was captured and brought to the United States to be held, this warring activity did not happen? There was no violence to speak of in a meaningful way between the cartel families to fill the void of El Chapo. And, and incidentally, at the same time that that happened, what we also saw was the beginning of the flooding of cheap fentanyl coming across our borders, literally within the same few months time frame, weeks, maybe days. Okay, what does that mean? What it means is a cheap drug that has that high of a markup that can be moved across the border. You don't need to bring fentanyl in bales like marijuana used to be back in the 70s. You can bring very small incremental amounts of it and make far, far more money than you ever did in the marijuana trade. The reason why that's important is because the cost of that drug getting across the US border was enough to stabilize all of the elements that would otherwise be rushing to fill a power vacuum. The cost of war, the cost of violence, the cost of fighting, in essence, was more expensive than to continue to do business as usual with the introduction of this new drug. Am I saying that these two things happening on their own aren't related? I'm going to let you come to your own conclusions on this. But I think it's very, very odd and very, very peculiar that the last time that the United States was involved in bringing down a drug lord, this type of violence did not happen. There was no violent internecine warfare between the cartels battling for drug routes and market share. None. Virtually none. I mean, I'm sure there was a small scattering somewhere here or there. There was no open warfare to replace El Chapo, because at literally the same time there was an introduction of a new drug that Americans started to demand immediately and right away. We of course say fentanyl, fentanyl, fentanyl. It's horrible. They're the ones doing this. Most of this trade could have been shut off a long, long time ago. And you have to ask yourself, is the stabilization of Mexico more important than fighting the drug trade that we've never been really successful at fighting for stabilization reasons? Again, if Mexico devolves into complete warfare, into a failed state, the amount of migration coming across the border is going to be 100 times what we saw in the worst instances over the course of the past few months, years, excuse me, few decades. That's something we can't handle. We can't absorb all of that. There's no way. We don't have the resources to stop that, let alone the danger of what fills just on our border. What about the influence of other foreign governments and foreign threats coming in and establishing a stronger presence in Mexico? So look, all of this is part of a lot of the domestic problems that Mexico has been facing for and battling for a long time. This is not new. But as Americans, we need to get educated as to why it's happening and what our involvement is in it, because it has geopolitical implications. Am I blaming America for this problem? I am not. Am I absolving us for our part in the complicitness of it? No, I'm not also. I'm not casting any judgment or any aspersions. I'm just saying this is what it is. This is the way that it works. I have also asked the question of people on the ground, are you seeing the federales down there? Are you seeing soldiers, Mexican soldiers on the ground? And the answer is no, they're not, at least not to this point, which tells me that there's a tactical decision to allow the cartels to send their message, to do what they're going to do, and not get engaged in direct open conflict, at least at this point. Now, if you do start to see innocents being killed, and I've seen no reports of that, if I'm wrong, people let me know. I've heard no rumors of that. This is all largely designed to send a very strong message to the government of Mexico, to the government of Jalisco, and I think also to the government of the United States, which is very unique for a cartel, by the way, because the cartels going open conflict with the cartels and the United States government doesn't end well for the cartels. It doesn't end well for the cartels. It doesn't end well for Mexico. It doesn't end well for the United States. It doesn't matter. And as we know, the Trump administration is more than happy to be very bellicose and belligerent in its posturing with military might to say, if you don't behave this way, then we're going to drop the hammer. And we also know, guys, that the appetite for the American public in not worrying about loss of innocent life or civilian life or the destruction of infrastructure in Mexico, the average American could probably care less. The average Republican doesn't care, by the way, and certainly in the upper echelon of the Trump administration, that's not something that they're concerned about. So that's just, I think, obvious. But we also have to remember that type of military infrastructure strike will have short, medium, and long-term implications for um, for the United States, our foreign policy, our domestic policy, the economy of Mexico. It's going to have dramatic impacts on immigration. It's going to have dramatic impacts on the drug trade, the violence that we'll start to see in the United States as drug prices starts to go significantly higher because supply is shut down. A lot of what you're seeing with homelessness on the streets right now, the drug fentanyl, say what you will about it, it's obviously a horrible scourge, but fentanyl isn't like methamphetamine where people, become violent. It causes kind of this stupor. If you don't overdose on it, you kind of this stupor. It makes people sort of, it's not something that creates violence on our streets. But and the main reason is because the drug is so damn cheap and so easily available. Once that changes, if that changes, you're going to see a very different domestic situation here in the United States. If you do start to see the fentanyl situation just completely cut off, like I'm saying, I'm not saying don't do it. I'm not saying that at all. We shouldn't. We need to police drugs. We need to get rid of this horrible scourge that just tears the soul out of human beings. I'm just saying we need to be mindful of the repercussions of that. For every action, there's a consequent reaction, and that reaction is going to be very problematic in the United States. It just is. So to think that this is just kind of going in and bombing Iran the way we do, and it's something we see in the Middle East, 6,000 miles away, this is on our doorstep. And I'm certain, I would hope anyway, that there's a lot of diplomatic activity and communications between the United States government and the Mexican government. It sounds like we have been working very closely with them to begin with. Um, and we're going to have some sort of a plan, a concerted strategy to get the violence under control. Remember, this also going to have significant economic impact. A lot of our supply chains that we've been shutting off from China have now moved to Mexico. So that changes. That makes everything very, very, very complicated. It makes everything very involved, economically, politically, socially, culturally. Let's be mindful. World Cup is coming too. Guadalajara is one of the main cities. There are literally there's gunfire and hijackings and buses being lit on fire in the core of Guadalajara, the amazingly beautiful city, huge city with a history that long, long, long predates not just Mexico, but the United States of America. Guadalajara is an extraordinarily beautiful historic city, lots of soccer stadiums. Our own World Cup is, I think, the luster is coming off of it because we don't know if people are actually going to come to the United States. This could dramatically impact visits to Mexico from around the world. I think it probably will. So there's a lot. There's a lot going on that I think we need to be mindful of. And again, I think I got a little bit off topic, but I'm hoping that everybody has a little bit more understanding, and I wanted to kind of bring some of this to bear. Where is all this going? We don't know. We don't know where this is all going. But what we do know is that we are in the midst of a pretty significant change. My strong sense is our involvement with the Mexican government is far more determined to root out the core of the cartel influence in Mexico and these trade routes. And I'm not saying that's a good or bad thing. I think it's ultimately a good thing. But when you do go in and extricate something, even when you tear a cancer out of the body reacts to that. There are repercussions. This is what we're seeing. We're starting to see part of those repercussions. So we need to be vigilant. We need to be mindful. We need to be careful that we're not sharing misinformation and bad photographs, bad video. The airport at Puerto Vallarta is calm and quiet, although it is shut down. I just tweeted some video from the airport. Guadalajara, there were reports of shootings inside. And again, I don't suspect and I don't believe that they're shooting people. I think they're shooting randomly to scare people. I'm not trying to to mitigate it. I'm not trying to dismiss it. This is a horrible situation, but it's not the same as them going into random public places and just mowing civilians down. That's not what's happening. Certainly not to this point. And none of that would make any strategic sense. Okay, there's no political value in doing that. There's no economic value in doing that. There's no rational value in doing that. Okay, you have to understand cartels are an illicit business, but they are extremely sophisticated international corporations, extremely sophisticated, extremely well resourced, that know what they're doing. And I'm not suggesting that's good or bad. I mean, I think they're bad. What they do to human beings is obviously awful. But it does require looking at these situations and these entities and these tactics a lot differently than most Americans usually do. So, any other questions? Anything else that I can answer right now? I'm not even sure if I provided a whole hell of a lot of information, other than we need to be mindful that this is happening. This is going to be an unfolding situation for the next couple of days at a minimum. Everybody that I'm talking to on the ground, while they're concerned and they're worried and they're seeing their city under siege, there is no panic. There is no serious alarm. Um, in many ways, this is kind of I don't want to say it's not business as usual. Puerto Vallarta specifically has never dealt with this level of violence. Um, but it is designed, especially in the high part of tourist season, to shut things down. The restaurants are closed. People are being asked to stay in their condos, their timeshares, their hotels, their villas. Don't leave. Don't come into town. Don't drive around. Both sides have said don't be on the streets after sunset. Cars are being lit on fire. Um, Roadblocks have been enacted. The Pemex station, which is the gas stations down there, the state-owned gas stations a block from my home, is on fire. I do have staff, family, neighbors, all in the area. There does not seem to be certainly not panic, just a controlled worry. Just everyone is being very sober and mindful of what's happening at the moment. Gracias, Ana Luz. You should still be worried about your sister and her friends. I'm not saying everything is okay, but I also don't want to kind of elevate it more than it is and remind people that, um, at least for the moment, as it has been for the past 25 or 30 years, there's every incentive for cartels and violence not to attack civilians, and moreover, especially Americans. And let me just run this as a closing. Let me run this understanding by you. If the cartels went into a big mall, there's a big Costco that's on fire right now. I shop there all the time. Right in the marina, right by where the cruise ships come in, if you've ever been to Puerto Vallarta. Big Costco, right next to a Home Depot, right next to a Sam's Club. All that infrastructure is there. Let's say 30 guys come in, masked guys with automatic weapons, and start mowing down a bunch of Americans. What would happen? What would the Trump administration do? They're not just gonna be like going, "Oh, that's a bad thing, don't do that." No, you would see those aircraft carriers turn around from the Mediterranean and be on both the Atlantic and Pacific sides of Mexico, and we would absolutely go in there and elbow our way in and clean out the whole damn thing. The cartels know that. That's not good for business. Killing innocent people is not good for business. All of these beheadings, all of these violent activities, the overwhelming number of that, not all of them, but the overwhelming number of that are people that are involved at some level in cartels, involved in the drug trade. And it's a significant, sorry, I'm getting notes from people sending stuff on WhatsApp right now. If you're not following me on Twitter, I know a lot of people aren't on Twitter. You can follow me. I will be reposting more of this stuff. But I wanted to kind of give you a kind of a sense of this. But remember, at least for the moment, Americans, I think it's safe as long as you are staying home and keeping your wits about you. I know that's very weird for Americans to say. If you've spent a long time abroad, especially in the developing world, that's not that peculiar. You understand the politics above you. It has nothing to do with you. Don't be walking out, taking pictures and trying to see, what's going on. Um, Stay in, stay safe. Um, Wait till this blows over. And keep in mind that, the longer this goes, the greater the likelihood that you're going to see a very significant show of force from either the Mexican government or the US government or combined heading in there to stabilize the region. I don't think it will get there. Could I be wrong? Of course, I could be wrong. But I'm thinking, after 48, 72 hours, you threw your tantrum, you did your damage, you burned a bunch of stuff, you hurt the tourism industry, you scared people, message sent. Um, Hopefully, no deaths. I think there probably won't be. Um, if that is the case, then and I think that's the likeliest scenario, at least at this point. Um, that I think is the way this kind of runs its course. We'll have to wait and see. Regardless, I will be here updating you if you're interested. This is obviously very important to me because it's personal, but it also impacts the geopolitics of the situation. So if I can be a resource for you guys, please let me know. And as you're getting information, share it with me. Let me know if you've got sourced photos or videos or information from firsthand accounts. Share it with me, and I'll do my best to get some of that stuff out. So with that in mind, Dios bendigo a Puerto Vallarta. God bless Puerto Vallarta. Take care of the people there. Take care of our tourists there. And hopefully, our world this upcoming week with Iran and Mexico will not be as violent as the signs seem to be pointing to. So, thank you for joining, guys.